Hello everyone, welcome to the PMP exam question and answers practice session for June. So just like the previous months, we would be solving 5 medium to high difficulty level PMP exam style questions today in this video. And for each of the 5 questions, we would be doing a detailed explanation on the correct and the incorrect answer choices. The intent of this exercise is firstly to test how well you are prepared for the PMP exam. So for example, you can use this scorecard that you see on screen to test your performance across the 5 questions. And secondly, the goal of this exercise is to develop your understanding on the correct process and strategy for solving PMP exam questions efficiently. Please give this video a like and let's get started with question number 1.
Right, so question number 1, guys, please read the question and try to answer it before we solve this together. You can pause the video here if you wish to. Okay, so let's get started. A project manager is planning the timeline for a critical software system upgrade and seeks input from multiple stakeholder teams to refine duration estimates. So the infrastructure team estimates the upgrade can be completed in 18 days. The security team, which is probably the cybersecurity team, identifies potential compliance issues that could extend the timeline to 35 days. And the development team suggests implementing an automated deployment approach could reduce the duration to 10 days. So the question is, what is the estimated project duration using beta estimation technique? So if you see here, you have 3 points of estimate here. One is optimistic point of estimate, which is 10 days. One is the most probable point of estimate, which is the 18 days. And one is the pessimistic point of estimate, which is the 35 days. So this typically refers to the 3-point estimation technique or the beta estimation technique. Now to apply the correct formula, you need to understand the difference between the formulas of 3-point estimation or triangular estimation versus beta estimation. So if you look at this article from Project Management Institute, it talks about the 2 mostly used formulas for 3-point estimates. The first one is the triangular distribution, which is basically your optimistic estimate plus most probable estimate plus pessimistic estimate divided by 3. However, here the question is asking for a beta estimation technique, right? So the beta distribution or the PERT technique is defined by this formula, which is your estimate, which is E, that is your estimate, is equal to O plus 4M plus P divided by 6. So that is the beta distribution, which is a weighted average in which more weight is given to the most likely estimate, which is at the mean point of your optimistic estimate versus your pessimistic estimate. So we have to be very careful in terms of applying the correct formula in these kind of questions. And yes, in 2025, you will definitely expect such questions coming up in your actual PMP exam, which will, let's say, theoretically test you numerically. However, it will more generically test you whether you are aware of the difference between the type of estimations which is driven by beta estimation versus triangular estimation or triangular distribution. So you can call it numerical, you can call it analytical, whichever way you want to call it. As your instructor, I would definitely encourage you to study at least these basic formulas and learning points for your PMP exam in 2025. Now, if we go back to this question, let's apply the formula of beta estimation technique here, which is P plus 4M plus O divided by 6, right? So here your pessimistic estimate is 35 days plus your most probable estimate is 4 multiplied by 18, which is your most probable estimate, and your most optimistic estimate is 10 days, okay, divided by 6. Now if you solve for this equation, the answer to this question is approximately 19.5 days, okay, which is your correct estimate for this situation where you are estimating the project duration using beta estimation technique, okay. So the correct answer to this question is option B. However, if you have applied the wrong formula here, for example, if you don't know what is the PERT or the beta estimation technique and you apply the formula of P plus M plus O divided by 3, which is actually a triangular estimation or a 3-point estimation and not a beta estimation, you will end up arriving at the wrong answer, which is 21 days. So please do this exercise yourself, and you will see that using the 3-point triangular estimate, you arrive at a very different answer, which is still here as option D. If you are not aware of the correct formula, you will end up selecting the wrong answer choice. So the correct answer to this question using beta estimation technique is 19 days.
Now, if you are preparing for the PMP exam, I would suggest that you check out my PMP exam preparation courses on Udemy. All the courses are very highly rated amongst the students, and many PMP exam aspirants have passed their PMP exams with the help of these courses. You can check the reviews on Udemy, and all the relevant links will be provided in the description section of this video. And now let's move on to question number 2.
Right, so question number 2, guys, please read the question and try to solve it before we take this together. You can pause the video here if you wish to. Okay, let's get started. A software development team is delivering high quality features for a mobile application project. However, the chief technology officer informs the project manager that the company is not getting sustainable return on investment from the team's current development efforts. So how should the project manager address the problem? It's a very interesting question, guys. So listen very carefully. So let's look at the options one by one. Option A. Define a minimum viable product or MVP with the team and prioritize relevant backlog items. Now, this is a possible answer choice because many of you might argue that having a minimum viable product and prioritizing relevant backlog items will help to deliver a sustainable return on investment on the product, because you will be sort of having that early feedback loop, right? Which is the basic concept of minimum viable product. Okay, so let's hold this option for now and we'll come back to it in some time. Let's look at option B. Reduce the number of developers as necessary to guarantee a positive return on investment. So this is incorrect, guys. Okay, because first of all, you cannot outrightly start reducing the number of developers, okay, because you might delay the project, you might delay the timelines, deliverables, etc. And by doing that as well, you cannot guarantee a positive return on investment, because ROI depends on a lot of other stuff which are not directly in your realm of control, okay, as a project manager. Having such superlatives on the answer choices should be a red flag for you when you are evaluating any answer choice, okay. So option B is definitely not the correct answer choice. Let's look at option C. Identify minimum marketable features, MMF, and prioritize relevant backlog items. Now, this is very similar to option A, with the only difference is here in option C, it is asking the project manager to prioritize the minimum marketable features, which is different, mind you, very different from the minimum viable product, okay? And this question is actually testing your understanding as a PMP exam aspirant, that whether you understand what is the key difference between a minimum marketable feature and a minimum viable product. Okay, so please go back to your Agile practice guide and study these two terminologies in detail. However, for this question, we'll be doing a quick overview of these two terms. However, before we do that, let's look at option D. Work with the Scrum Master to run a retrospective and perform project cancellation. Of course, I hope none of you have selected this option, which is totally outrageous that you cancel a project just because your company is not getting sustainable returns and your CTO is giving you feedback regarding the same. You don't cancel a project just because there is a feedback that has been provided to yourself, and that is a last resort for any project, and I'm pretty sure that none of you have selected option D. However, coming back to option A and option C, these are the most probable answer choices for this question. However, to find out the right answer choice, you need to understand what is the key difference between a minimum viable product and a minimum marketable feature. Now, if you look at the core difference between a minimum viable product and a minimum marketable feature, okay, it basically lies in the focus, right? If you study this screenshot, a minimum viable product is about learning and validating a product idea, while the MMF is about delivering a functional piece of the product that provides value to the customer. Okay. Now, the minimum viable product might not be a product which could be sent to the market and a revenue model could be generated from that. It is not guaranteed that your minimum viable product or MVP will be a saleable product. Okay. However, this is where the key difference lies between MVP and MMF. So your MMF, or the minimum marketable feature, is a product that is saleable at its very early stages, okay? And this is where you will have a revenue model coming out of your product, because this product now is not MVP anymore. It is now a marketable feature which can be sold to customers, maybe at a lower cost than the actual product. However, you will still be able to generate a return or a return on investment on your project. Okay, so this is where the core difference between MVP and MMF lies. Okay, just to summarize, MVP doesn't guarantee a return on investment based on revenue. Okay, however, MMF guarantees return on investment because MMF is saleable and you can sell a product in the market with its MMF version till the time you start adding upgrades to that product and make it a bit more high-end or a bit more functional, and you keep on jacking up the price at a later stage. Okay, so that is the key difference between MMF and MVP. Okay, now with that understanding, if we go back to our question, if we come back to this question, I hope all of you now will agree with me that the correct answer to this question is option C, because your CTO is raising a concern that the project is not generating return on investments with the development efforts, and that is why you need to identify the minimum marketable features and prioritize the relevant backlog items to make a version of the product which is saleable in the market. MVP does not guarantee a saleable product. Sometimes MVPs are given out for free to be tested in the market. Okay, and generally you can't charge a fee for that. Sometimes it is also the other way around, that actually you pay the users like money or some sort of incentive. You pay to the end users to use your product, to give the feedback back to your team so that you can actually develop on that product. So those are the MVP stages of the product. It's not the MMF stages of the product. Okay, so this is where you need to understand the key difference between MVP and MMF. Okay, so the correct answer to this question is option C, which is to identify minimum marketable features and prioritize the relevant backlog items.
Now, before we move on to question number 3, guys, I would like to introduce you to my PMP exam study group on YouTube. It's a monthly subscription based membership model, and you will get daily posts on highly nuanced tips and tricks to prepare for your PMP exam, which are generally not discussed on my YouTube videos. You can try it out for a few months and cancel anytime if you wish. Feedback from students for this study group has been excellent.
Alright, so question number 3, guys. The drill will remain the same. Please read the question, pause the video if you wish to, and try to answer it before we solve this together. Right, so let's get started. A new data privacy regulation. Okay, so this is a very important term to note in this question. It's a regulatory requirement, not an optional requirement. Okay, a new data privacy regulation requires additional security disclosures in a software application, but a company's mobile application interface has limited screen space to accommodate the extra information. The regulatory guidelines do not specify an implementation approach. However, they have given this guideline which needs to be adhered to from a legislation standpoint. However, they have not specified an implementation approach, so the development team decides to address the requirement by incorporating the disclosures into an expandable information panel. Okay, one way of doing it. Of course, it can be done, but let's look at the question, what it is asking from us. The deployment of the updated app version, the project's next major release, is scheduled to go live in 5 days. What should the development team do next? Okay, very important that it is asking what should the development team do after they have identified a way to incorporate that regulation into the product, which is by incorporating the disclosures into an expandable information panel. So it is very critical for you to understand that the question is asking that after the development team has identified a way out, what should the team do next? Okay, so let's look at the options one by one. Option A, update the product backlog to reflect the additional security disclosure requirement. Possible. You might argue that this is the next step, Ray, because I have identified a solution to the problem and it's a proposed solution, mind it. It's not been implemented yet, and I will straight away go and update the product backlog and move into the implementation phase. Is it the right approach? Questionable. We'll come back to it in a second. Option B, contact the legal team to determine the validity of the selected implementation approach. Very, very, very interesting answer choice, guys, because this is where it is very important for you to validate your assumptions as a project manager before you go into the implementation phase. And the problem with most of the project managers in my life, which I have seen, is they jump on their seats and they become so energetic to go into implementation that they forget to do the validation checks on critical regulatory or let's say health and safety items. So it's very important for you to understand that in this scenario, the proposal that you have provided as a product team to your regulatory team might not be acceptable. They might say that, look, the way you are disclosing this information in an expandable information panel is not acceptable to us, okay? You have to sort of have it in a different way, maybe in the welcome page or maybe as a pop-up. So the problem here in this scenario will be that if as a project manager, you assume that the solution that you are providing will be acceptable regardless because it is coming from you as a project manager, this is not the right approach. And the reason for that is if you link back this to the RACI matrix, which is the responsible, accountable, contributor and information part of a communication channel, you should know that the A or the approver or the entity with whom the accountability lies of this regulatory requirement is not you, but your legal or your cybersecurity or your regulation or privacy compliance team. Okay, so they have to be okay with respect to the solution which you are proposing. Because if you go ahead and implement something, tomorrow they might come back and say to you that, look, whatever you have done is great, but this does not match our requirement and you need to go back to the drawing board and redo the entire thing, right? So that is why option A is a very close answer choice, but it's an incorrect answer choice, guys. Option B is the correct answer choice to this question. We'll go and evaluate option C and D in a second. However, let's look at option B, which is to contact the legal team to determine the validity, a very, very important word in the entire answer option, of the selected implementation approach. Now let's look at option C, request approval from your product owner to proceed with the change. Of course, this is incorrect because of the reasons we have just discussed, that you cannot go ahead and start implementation without validating your proposal. Okay, and let's look at option D, develop a prototype as submitted to the App Store for approval. Again, this is incorrect. You cannot submit it to the App Store for approval because your legal team or your regulation team has not approved it yet. So that is why option D is also incorrect, and the correct answer to this question is option B, which is to contact the legal team to determine the validity of the selected implementation approach, which is incorporating the disclosures into an expandable information panel. And once you get the green light from that department, you are perfectly fine to move on to option A, which is to update the product backlog to reflect the additional security disclosure requirement, and your sprint cycle takes on from that point. Okay, so the correct answer is option B.
And now let's move on to question number 4.
Right, so question number 4, guys, the drill will remain the same. Please read the question and try to answer it before we solve this together. You can pause the video here if you wish to. Right, so let's get started. A senior architect on a construction project has been consistently underperforming and missing deliverables for several weeks following a recent bereavement. Okay, so someone has died in the family of the architect, and that is why he is feeling quite challenged, and that is why he's sort of underperforming and missing the deliverables. So due to this performance decline, multiple critical design reviews are delayed, which is affecting the project's timeline and putting key milestones at risk. How should the project manager handle this situation when he or she is trying to discuss the concerns and the challenges which the architect is facing in his or her domain at the moment? Okay, so this should be an easy one, guys. I hope most of you have got this correct. So let's look at the options one by one. Option A, remove the architect from the project team. Of course, it's quite insensitive and quite out of the blue. So you should not be doing such kind of stuff when someone is facing a issue such as bereavement in his or her personal life. So I hope none of you have selected option A. Let's look at option B, meet with the architect privately and collaborate to develop performance improvement plan. You can meet with the person, discuss the issue with the person, develop an improvement plan, and sort of help him in terms of coming back to the normal working environment. Let's look at option C. We hold option B for now. Report this as human resources matter. Request additional contractors to work extended hours. Similar to option A, you should not be doing such kind of stuff which portrays you as a insensitive or a project manager who does not know how to take care of the team members, does not know compassion, doesn't have that attitude of sympathy. Okay, so these kind of things are quite key traits of servant leadership. There are multiple videos on my YouTube channel which talks about servant leadership, so please go ahead and watch those videos as well after this one, because this skill of servant leadership will be tested again and again in your PMP exam through multiple questions across multiple scenarios. Okay, so option C is definitely incorrect. Let's look at option D. Contact the project sponsor for additional project support, including the assignment of a backup architect. Again, unnecessary escalation. And just because a person is not performing at the moment because of some family issues doesn't mean that it cannot be corrected with the right kind of coaching, guidance, and mentorship. And the correct answer to this question is option B, which is to meet with the architect privately and collaborate to develop a performance improvement plan. And that resonates quite well with the servant leadership attitude, which PMI wants to see in every PMP certified project manager.
And finally, let's move on to question number 5. Remember, the target is to get all the 5 out of the 5 questions correct, okay? However, the minimum expectation is that you will get at least 4 out of the 5 questions correct to consider yourself fairly well prepared for your PMP exam. You can assess your level of preparation according to this scorecard. So, here comes question number 5.
So the fifth and the final question, guys, please read the question, pause the video and try to answer it before we solve this together. Okay, so let's get started. The marketing department of a financial services company enthusiastically approved the development team's mid-project demo of a mobile banking app for elderly customers. However, the final product was considered unusable because of font sizes were too small for users with vision impairments to read the account information clearly. Typical scenario where there is a product feature mismatch with the end users. So what should the project manager do to avoid this kind of failure in the future? So the key word here is in the future. The question is not asking about what should the project manager do now to salvage the situation, but very important for you to note that it is asking for preventive measure, which is sort of a learn from experience that will be a good learning point for this project manager or any other project manager who is doing a similar project at a future date. Okay, so let's look at the options one by one. Option A, engage directly with the customer service department that handles end client support requests. Again, this is a very, very broad option, guys. Support requests could be anything under the sun. That doesn't necessarily mean that this will solve this issue of a small text size, which is considered a challenge for elderly customers with vision impairments. Okay. So option A is definitely incorrect. Let's look at option B. Ensure that all the app releases include configurable font sizes and contrast options. Okay, this is a too broad option again, guys, and many of you might have selected this option. And the reason why this option is incorrect, first of all, there is a superlative called all. Now, it is questionable whether all the app releases will need a configurable font size or contrast options, because some of the app releases might be improvements to the backend, improvements to the cybersecurity technical layer of the application, which does not have any sort of relevance to font size and contrast options, because the end users does not see what happens as a software update in the backend, right? However, configurable font sizes and contrast options, that is debatable because the app might cater to a lot of people who might have vision impairment and who might not have vision impairment, and what kind of font size, what kind of contrast options you will go for that. Okay, so that gives you a plethora of options, okay, to choose from. And again, it is not helping the situation to maintain or sort of ponder and think that, okay, what actions could I take to sort out such kind of issues in the future? Again, too broad option. So that is why option B is incorrect. Let's look at option C. Establish a comprehensive usability testing environment that simulates real user scenarios for developers. Okay. Now, on the face of it, it looks like a good option. It talks about establishing a testing environment. You are testing the application which simulates real user scenarios. The question is, are you doing that for the elderly customers or are you doing that for your developers? Now, the question is, if someone is looking at the application and giving a proxy of your elderly customers, you first need to question whether that is a correct proxy of your elderly customers or not, because a developer might not have the vision impairment, might be quite young. The testing which that developer will be doing, keeping the end user in mind and not representing the actual end user, might be quite different from the actual scenario. Option C is too broad an option, but let's look at option D and come back to option C in a second. Option D is arrange for actual elderly customers, very important. To test prototypes, again, links back to our concept of MVP or minimum viable product, or MMF or minimal marketable feature that we have learned in question number 2 or 3 in today's session. And incremental releases in realistic settings. Okay, so that is a very, very comprehensive option, and the correct answer to this question is option D, which is to arrange for such kind of prototype testing or a prototype testing exercise for actual elderly customers, because then you have the real-time feedback of your actual end users and you do not do a simulation based on what you think might be the response of your end users, because here you are actually not using your end users, you are using some simulation for your developers who might not be able to comprehend the actual end user requirements regarding font sizes, right? So option C is a very close option, but incorrect answer choice for all the reasons that we have discussed, and the correct answer to this question is option D.
I hope you liked the session, guys. Please press the like button and subscribe to this channel if you really found this session helpful for your PMP exam preparation. Also, do not get demotivated if you have scored less, okay? Remember, the key is to analyze and learn from your mistakes and course correct now, so that you do not get caught out during the actual PMP exam, okay? Thank you for watching, and I will see you again in the next video.